We're here to discuss the challenges faced as we work to build an effective, independent Black radical movement. The Black Alliance for Peace has been involved in careful, thoughtful base building across the nation with international relationships for almost 4 years now, and has within the Black Alliance for Peace, there are member organizations such as those that are represented on today's panel that have also been engaged in this process for as many or for many more years. And from our varied organizational experiences, we all know that the conditions of this moment are unlike any other that has been seen in our history. The information age is making the propaganda process difficult at a time when the contradictions of capitalism and the fallacy of the narrative of capitalism's necessity and value have been made more apparent than ever before. People have been gaining unprecedented access to truth beyond the propaganda, and at the same time, agents of the system are responding with urgency, bombarding our communities across the globe with ongoing emergencies, weaponizing urgency and our care for each other to distract us while they deepen their military responses and occupation in our communities in the US and abroad. Concurrently, these same agents of the state use the same technology that provides the people access to truth and each other, to increase their surveillance and to sow bedlam and chaos. And these charlatans have also succeeded in capitalizing off of the confusion of the Obama administration and the resulting imagined American embrace of the African, driving our community members to the center while they continue to use language of the radical Black movement in order to identify as radical themselves. Our panelists today will share their reflection on this moment now. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then they're each going to give you a few words. We have several panelists. I'm going to just first tell you their names is Ajamu Baraka, Asha Rasmus, Yolian Agbu, Erica Caines, Dedan Waikori, and Elaine Brown. And I'm going to read you the bios of the first panelists that will be speaking. So Ajamu Baraka is a veteran of the Black Liberation Movement, an organizer, writer, and internationally recognized human rights defender with over 48 years of movement work in the US and internationally. Ajamu is currently the national organizer for the Black Alliance for Peace. He is also in the leadership bodies of the US Peace Council, United National Anti-War Coalition, and the steering committee of the Black is Back Coalition. Asha Rasmus is an abolitionist organizer, currently the co-director of organizing at Dissenters, an anti-militarist organization of young people. She is a founding member of BYP 100, a Black queer feminist movement organization, which she has served in both local and national leadership. As a college student, Asha helped launch and led a campaign called Columbia Prison Divest, which was the first successful campaign to get a US university to financially divest from the private prison industry. Great work. In 2014, she was a part of the We Charge Genocide youth delegation to the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, where she testified on police violence in Chicago. Asha also sits on the steering committee for a citywide campaign to defund the Chicago Police Department launched by the Black Abolitionist Network. Yolian Agbu is a student organizer at the University of North Texas in the Dallas, Texas area. She is a member of HOAPALS, Horn of Africa, Pan-Africans for Liberation and Solidarity, working on creating political education materials to increase consciousness in the diaspora. While on campus, Yolian helped to build campaigns advocating for increasing minimum wage, defunding the police, and investing in a growing Black student population through various accessible student services. Erica Caines is a poet, writer, and organizer in Baltimore and the DMV. She is a coordinating committee and outreach team member of the Black Alliance for Peace, as well as an outreach member of the Black Working Class Centered Ujima People's Progress Party in Maryland. Has also founded Liberation Through Reading in 2017 as a way to provide Black children with books that represent them, and created the extension, a book club entitled Liberation Through Reading BC to strengthen political education online and in our communities. Caines is co-editor of the African revolutionary blog Hood Communist, which everyone should be reading. Dedan Wikari is an organizer, revolutionary located in Eastern North Carolina. He is the founder and chair of a local organization, Mapinduzi, in Greenville, North Carolina. Wikari is also the project manager for North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, as well as a member of the Coordinating Committee for the Black Alliance for Peace. Dedan has been organizing locally and with surrounding areas for more than 5 years. His collaborative efforts have allowed him to work with many local and remote organizations. Our final panelist, Elaine Brown, I'll read her bio after we hear from these first panelists. And so I want to let's go ahead and get started and start with my friend, comrade, mentor, brother Ajamu Baraka.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yaning, and thank everyone who has joined us this evening for this hopefully very informative and definitely important conversation. In my brief comments, I just wanted to sort of not so much lay the foundation, but to talk about the framing of this. We talk about the need to have this kind of conversation within the context of the current crisis. And I think it's important to identify what we mean by the current crisis and to understand to what extent this crisis may be different from other crises. And so to do that for me, let me just indulge you for a moment and suggest that this crisis that we are experiencing today, while it is intense and fairly unique, it has a foundation in the ongoing, evolving contradictions of this colonial capitalist system. And I'm going to go back a few decades to kind of talk about what I mean. To understand today, let's go back to the 1970s. The 1970s, the beginning of the 1970s, mid-1970s, was a very, very important point in our history. We all know, and we're not going to talk about a lot of this for myself, at least, you know, the intensified struggles that emerged in the 1960s in this country into the 1970s. But what we need to talk about, though, is this, that by the beginning and mid-1970s, what we had was an even more intense fight back from the system. And we know that the state engaged in a vicious war against the Black liberation movement and the radical movement in this country. And we know about the victims of, or the casualties of that war, both in terms of people who lost their lives and people who ended up captured and imprisoned, people who had to leave the country. But what we don't talk about enough, I think, is the aspect of the counterinsurgency that has the most profound impact. Now, of course, you know, by undermining our ability to resist, undermining our emerging revolutionary processes, it had a profound impact on our people, no question about that. But what had an even more profound impact, in my opinion, is the ideological component of the counterinsurgency. And what I mean by that, that basically what the state decided to do was that not only would they engage in the military component of the assault on our movement, but they were planning for the long term. And they had decided that what they needed to do to ensure some degree of social peace, if you will, was to make sure that another generation that produced the likes of people like Elaine Brown and others would never emerge again. And so they moved to engage in what I call the Americanization of the African, to incorporate us ideologically. And those various ways in which that happened, from forced busing to the whole notion of the system expanding and the new petty bourgeoisie, affirmative action, all of these, Black power, the way it was defined, all of these were devices that were used to psychologically and emotionally, politically, and ideologically to incorporate us as part of the state. And I argue that process was a very intense process that culminated with the ascendancy to power of Barack Hussein Obama. That at that point, that process was relatively successful in helping to undermine a sense of peoplehood among our folks, and to have people identifying with this state, even when they saw the contradictions. So this crisis that we are facing was important, was an important development. And the reason why it's so profound today is because that ideological incorporation took place at the same time that the system was moving toward neoliberalism, a new form of organizing capital that was born out of an assault on the country of Chile. But that process of restructuring the US economy, the rebellion by capital against Keynesianism that provided some degree of social reform for people. This is part of the broader counter-revolutionary process to discipline the working class, to undermine resistance. And the consequence of that economic restructuring is responsible for the economic conditions we face today. The way in which they shifted the industrial base from the US, first to the South, then Mexico, then eventually to China and parts of Asia. That this had a devastating impact on our communities and the working class in general. Those conditions were corresponding with changes politically, with the ascendancy of the Democratic parties, embracing of Wall Street, becoming a neoliberal party. And these factors together created the conditions that led to Barack Obama and the collapse in 2007 and 2008 of the economy, and the inability of the economy to really recover properly, that created the conditions that led to the ascendancy of Donald Trump. Okay, so this crisis of capital, this crisis of this system, this legitimation crisis is what we are facing today. The fact that Black people occupy the lowest rungs on the labor ladder. Our people, young people facing astronomical unemployment rates of 60, 70, 80% in various urban areas. The mass incarceration that we are facing, infant and maternal mortality that mirrors what you see in so-called global South nations. These are the conditions that we were facing before the collapse of the economy in 2020 as a consequence of COVID. So with COVID and the economic conditions we were facing already, we are now facing the most severe conditions we have maybe ever faced since we were enslaved, okay? So what that all says to me is this: we can no longer engage in a politics in which we obscure what it is we up against and what we have to fight for. And that's why I feel so honored to work with some of the people that we're working with within the Black Alliance for Peace, that these are young folks, quite younger than me, and I'm so glad I'm still here to be part of this, who recognize that we've got to have a different kind of politics, who recognize and are committed to building a real radical movement, a movement that clearly identifies that the enemy is capitalism and the colonial system, that understands we have to be grounded in the working class, who understands the concept of class and class struggle, who also understand that we can no longer allow ourselves to engage in this crippling US centrism in which we are just looking at conditions in the US and not understanding the connections between our plight in the US and the global conditions, understanding that we are part of one global system. So recapturing this understanding and recapturing this commitment to the traditional Black radical internationalism. These are the politics that many of the young people in the Black Alliance for Peace manifest, what they embrace. And this is something that I think we've got to advance, because as long as we continue to allow for forces to suggest to us that all we can do is tail behind the Democrats, that we can't envision building a revolutionary movement that transcends this madness, that our plight in the US is different from the plight of African people on the African continent or in Venezuela, or people who are struggling for sovereignty in North Korea or in Colombia or Haiti. You know, we've got to advance a new kind of politics because the moment demands that. Time out for playing games. Time out for suggesting that we could reform this system. Even the enemy understands there's no reform. And that's why they're conditioning the masses of the people in this country to accept censorship and to accept ideological conformity. We've got to reject that and prepare our forces for the kind of horrific struggle that we have to engage in. So, you know, any obscure politics that undermine our commitment and understanding of what we have to do, we've got to reject. We've got to tell people that time is now for us to recapture the spirit of our resistance, the spirit of our revolutionary resistance, and to build a new movement. And that has to be the basis of our conversation. So folks who are my age and older, who would tell young people that all you can do is engage in lesser two evilism, they should be rejected. They should be rejected. So my position is, and I hope this is something that is shared by most of the people on this call, is that now is the time for us to understand that we have the possibility and indeed the responsibility to build a movement to free ourselves, to transform this society, and indeed because of where we are situated within the center of empire, to free up the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Ajmu. Thank you for those wonderful words of wisdom and inspiration. You can see that people really appreciate them if you check the chat. We're going to move right along. I'm really excited to hear the comments from the other panelists. Speaking of dynamic young people, our next panelist, whose bio I've already read to you, is Asha. Very excited to hear what you have to say, Asha.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. You spoke a lot about Obama and what the Obama era kind of meant. So I'm going to start a little bit there as well. And just to situate kind of the arc of my political life so far, it was my first year of high school when Obama was first elected as president. And then it was my first year of college when it was his re-election campaign. I saw, you know, a lot of fresh young 18-year-olds going to, you know, go to other states to knock on doors and things like that. And so I really kind of came of age when there was a mainstream discourse about whether or not we were post-race. Like that was a, you know, term that people were using and talking about. And in that kind of mainstream dominant discourse, there was this idea that having a Black president was this kind of like pinnacle of progress past racial injustice in this country. Of course, that was a false narrative. And I think it's really important to situate the evolution and, you know, the birth of the kind of movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter movement that was born under, you know, Obama as a Black president. That was a time, you know, that I and so many other of my peers became politicized and active. And it was in specifically that context of the stark contrast on one hand between seeing kind of Black faces in high places in like, you know, a way we never had before. And on the other hand, still ongoing structural inequality, as well as the cruel and violent police murders of Black people at the hands of the police, at the hands of vigilantes, and at the hands of white supremacist actors and agents. And so, yeah, I think that is the kind of the contrast that shapes this movement that, you know, has shaped so much of my political life. I think it really, the movement emerged in spite of that narrative and kind of killed the narrative that, you know, we were post-race. And I don't think that is something that is really, you know, a legitimate conversation, obviously, in the mainstream at this point in time. So I was politicized around specifically the Trayvon Martin case was when I was sort of first becoming active. He was about my same age when he was killed. And I was in a room full of other young Black activists and organizers from around the country when, we watched that video of George Zimmerman being acquitted, that being a very transformative and powerful moment for myself. And out of that is what formed BYP 100, a Black queer feminist youth organization that I've been a part of. And there were many other Black organizations, Dream Defenders and others, that were kind of founded at that time. Then Mike Brown happened a year later, was killed and left in the street for 4.5 hours. Ferguson erupted. The Black Lives Matter kind of movement sort of got more and more attention. All of this under this Black president who campaigned on like hope and change and progress or whatever. And so I think that has always has been instinctually a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think is something to kind of ground ourselves in. And I think over the past 8 years that this movement and that I've been active, we've seen shifts in the demands that folks have been calling for more and more structural changes. So at that time, I was coming into grounding my politics as an abolitionist, as an anti-capitalist, and really trying to push and hope that we were calling for demands that were reflective of that. But that was really still a kind of marginal position within the movement. In like 2014 and 2015, the popular demands that we would see after, there would be one of these like kind of highly publicized police killings. It would be a call for individual cops to be sent to jail. There were a lot of calls for consent decrees on cities, for police accountability. And, we see kind of 5, 6, 7 years later, when the uprisings exploded this past summer, the call was for defunding the police. And so I think that kind of arc and landscape toward what, I would describe as a more structural demand, right? We're not just demanding that the same system that's hurting us, right, try to hold itself accountable, but we're actually demanding that actually, no, we need to take power and resources away from the system of policing as a whole. Abolition being a much kind of more centered, rallying political framework that I think a lot more people are seeing as the guideposts, the pillars of the movement among my peers. And I see also like a growing number of people, although this maybe is the marginal edge we're at now, understanding abolition as a fundamentally anti-capitalist and revolutionary vision, right? That's definitely not something that's clear across the board. I think that's like an important edge for us organizers and our job as being tasked with ensuring that those connections are being made. When we say defund the police, to abolish the police, to make sure that that is understood, that this is a call to uproot racial capitalism and a call to dismantle the forces that are using violence to uphold the system of US capitalism. And so I think that's really like one of the kind of primary charges that, we organizers, movement leaders, whatever you see your role as, need to be leaning into in this moment. And so I'll just name a couple of like the other, challenges that I see in this moment. Ajam, you spoke a lot to this, but the neoliberal power structure has and continues to be really good at showing us symbolism and branding it as progress or change. And that is confusing for people. And so like one of the challenges is just how we cut through that when there is, a power structure that is fighting to create buy-in and create support for the systems that we live under via these like symbolic things, at the same time as providing less and less material support for oppressed groups and people. So there's that. I think we're fighting enemies on multiple fronts. We talk about, far-right white supremacists. We talk about neoliberal establishment Democrats. They're both fighting using different strategies and tactics to uphold the same structures and systems. And I think we need to be like sophisticated and nuanced about, there are divisions among the ruling class in this moment. They're employing different strategies to uphold the same structures. And those differences are like opportunities that we can exploit to undermine the systems that we're trying to fight. So, both are enemies and like maybe need to be dealt with differently. We want to see them more divided. We want to see the ruling class be more divided, not more unified. So it helps us to frame it in that way, in my opinion. Another challenge, I think, like patriarchy, gender, and sexual violence in our movements is something that has probably, always been a problem, but it is, in my experience, just one of the most disruptive and harmful things that we're facing kind of internally. And while it's amazing and heartwarming to see so many more people, as abolition is this more and more popular ideology, embrace things like transformative justice and restorative justice. I think we also need to lean into, like, what does it mean to invite people into kind of the work of personal transformation, to be taken like equally as seriously as the process of radicalization, in order to show up in the work as principled leaders. And so, yeah, that's just like some of the challenges that I feel like we're facing in this moment. And I'm excited to be in conversation with other panelists.
Thank you so much, Asha. Thank you. Yes. And, and that's a really great kind of like trajectory of conversation from the foundation of what was laid down from by Ajamu as it relates to the counterinsurgency and that whole process of, really creating a lot of confusion within our community. But then, Asha, you reminded us that there are still a lot of people who see through that, who are doing the work, even if we are challenged to like reinvigorate the understanding amongst the broader base of our community, that there is a large number of members of our community who are organizing with a clearer understanding of what's going on and making like these really important system-oriented demands around transformation. And so, thank you for that. And next, so we're going to have Yolian, who's going to share her thoughts as well. Looking forward to hearing them.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine. I'm so excited to be in this space. And I really appreciate the foundation that has been set and the frameworks presented. I'd love to also give context to my own politicization and kind of also provide a framework that kind of goes outside of the US a bit more too, as that is relative to my understanding of politics in this realm, right? So for me, while I was born in the States, I'm originally from Eritrea, and that's where my family is from. They relocated to the States as a result of a revolutionary liberation movement that had occurred in Eritrea, and as they sought independence, and rightfully were able to retrieve it. And so as someone that have parents and family members that have been able to see, witness, and become a part of revolution itself, it's interesting for me because as I was in the States and growing up, they've kind of really already instilled those ideas of dissatisfaction with the state and current affairs. But I think what was so interesting for me is actually I was in the 5th grade when Obama was first elected. So I kind of saw that as like a beacon of hope, and it was literally antithetical to what I was learning at home, and I didn't really understand that. So I spent the next period of my life through high school and the beginning of college attempting to I guess grapple with and understand why the outside world was saying one thing, and then people, my family at home was giving me a whole other version and understanding of the world today. So then I think kind of what happened for me in terms of my politicization came in college as I tried to get involved in organizing, and I saw through everything that was happening. So then what I think from my perspective is I see that the diaspora is often prey to imperialist propaganda within my generation and beyond, in which that limits our ability to actively unite through this Black internationalist framework, right? So I think what happened, and I noticed this for myself too, is that there was this loss in a recognition that we in the States, right, within the imperial core, have more in common with liberation movements in the global South and rebellions for freedom and any type of control over some sort of economy or basically active resistance against hegemony, compared to the Black political elite in the West, right, here that I'm seeing that attempt to present this false united front, right? So that's why the idea of representation politics versus identity politics has now come into that sphere. And I constantly been wondering if that is something that we are kind of moving towards, and I see that happening. which is why this is integral to the work of HOA pals, we say pals, as there is this wave of neoliberal, what we like to call human rights activism, that essentially bastardizes the very definition of democracy, only so that it may adhere to the very institutions in which they serve, right? So anybody in the West, or the governments that seek to sustain power within the global South, even within the Horn, in which, obviously I come from and I have very big relations to. So I think this is where it's important personally, and within the space that I'm in, to disaggregate this ideology among the diaspora, right? And in an attempt to not necessarily dispose of folks, right, that constantly, I think, are inundated with liberal ideology, but I think it's a necessary part in resisting any conflation of neoliberal calls for Black unity, and that inherently mean destabilization on one side and maybe not the other, versus real solidarity and movement building. So I think the questions that I'm constantly attempting to ask, and I'm really excited to be talking about, is what does principled transnational organizing look like? And how do we, in the context of certain campaigns and the crises that we are facing, center and continue centering the struggles of the most marginalized, even those that are not within the imperial core? I also wanted to mention the idea of Pan-Africanism, trying to coming back to the sphere, and kind of something that one of the members within the space that I'm occupying within PALS mentioned, that there has to be this reimagining of this concept within the day and age that we live in now, right? So we all understand that Pan-Africanism is defined as a political objective, the total liberation and political unification of all African peoples in the continent in general. What I think is really important to be discussing is the concepts of what does that look like within unifying, within the people that are in the imperial core and beyond, across the world, and how do we challenge those concepts of notions of nationalism, while also recognizing that nationalism within the global South, right, is a necessary tool to confront and defend oneself from the imperial powers of the West. And I'm really excited to get into that. Kind of the last thing that I'm really interested in talking about too today is I think a unique manifestation of the ideological counterinsurgency that Ajamu mentioned, which this Gen Z phenomena that people may have seen on social media called the youth activist industrial complex, people like to call it. And this idea that it's this pipeline that sucks in people that I was almost privy to. It's people as young as 12 or 13. And what I see what happens is, we, born out of social media, viral moments, all of a sudden, we kind of get inundated and we get all this attention from media and different mainstream outlets that then allow us to gain social media influencer status. And then from there, we kind of create, brand deals with companies that essentially are antithetical to the work of the revolutionary rhetoric that we are putting out. And while I understand that co-optation of revolutionary rhetoric is not unique to this generation, I do see a unique manifestation of that being weaponized. And I do see that being a problem that I'm really interested in seeing what it looks like in this discussion. And it does lead young people to pursue opportunities, such as, lead within the capitalist system that benefit us individually. And that kind of relates to the Americanization of the African. We're kind of forced to integrate in that sphere. But what we don't want, right, is to further legitimize this neoliberal regime that we are under. So I'm so excited to be discussing ways that we are combating that across the board, multi-generationally.
All right, so we just got this panel here that is spitting fire on top of fire and then more gasoline on fire. This is such an exciting conversation. Thank all of you, and absolutely, I do, it's really interesting hearing the different places that we may have been marking this moment of the Obama presidency, which really marks a moment of the ideological movement of our community. And certainly the one of the biggest pieces that has been undermined is our Pan-African perspective, which has been a part of the core of the African community until this Americanization has happened. But now there's also a reinvigoration of that is a part of what all of these groups that who's been represented on this panel has spoken to already, that have spoken organize around. So before moving on to our next speaker, who I'm really looking forward to hearing from, I just want to make sure that the attendees, if you have questions, please drop your questions in the Q&A. If you want to direct your question to anyone in particular, you can also indicate that as well. But please go ahead and start dropping your questions. I know you all have got some great questions just come from hearing these amazing remarks already. But next coming up, we're going to hear from Erica, who I like to call Ricky. So Ricky, come on and let us hear your thoughts.
Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining this discussion that I'm very, very, very excited to be a part of. Because I have a lot of nieces and nephews and godchildren and younger cousins who are a part of that sort of generation Z. Well, is it Z? Yeah, I think it's Z. that Asha was speaking to, and you know, they're becoming more politically activated through social media. And I think that the summer of 2020 and the George Floyd uprisings, that sparked in them a lot of what we see to do to the world, like a recognition of anti-Blackness and the ways that it manifests through deaths caused by the state. However, the lack of critical intergenerational conversations such as these distorts an understanding of this moment and an understanding of the US as an imperialist empire. So I want to read this quote from Kwame Ture. He says, in 1965, the Africans rebelled in Watts. Yorty was mayor, a white man. You can call him a racist. In 1992, they rebelled. Bradley was mayor. He's an African. What is the objective difference here? The only difference is that American capitalism, in order to try to deceive the people, tries to give us visibility with no power at all. Africans in this country have more elected officials in the country than any other ethnic group in the country. We have no power at all. And Kwame Ture said that at a discussion on the condition of the Black community in 1993, which so happened to feature Elaine Brown as well. The Black Alliance for Peace has done great work in its 4 years of existence, connecting imperialism domestically and globally, as we heard Ajamu do so clearly. But we must continuously expose the disconnect existing between the Black radical history and mainstream media narratives of progress that's really regress. And it's defined as Black liberation. And they do so by collapsing identity politics into merely being represented by a race within neoliberalism, which is a right-wing ideology. And this has made it easier to erase the Black radical traditions. The insidiousness of liberalism manifests in the ways it folds Blackness and other colonized identities into the confines of Americanism to expand US dominance and control around the world. The manipulation of Black excellence by normalizing this settler colonial nation and thus aspiring to hold a leadership position within it has served as a breeding ground for manufacturing consent for the entrapment of how we understand Black liberation. Also, the red herring of full-out fascism to describe Trump and his supporters and his presidency has created a misunderstanding of this political moment as easier to organize under now that he's gone. But we know with an administration mirroring a United Colors of Benetton ad with the same amount of substance and no immediate regard for the Black and colonized working class here and globally, we have to have a razor sharp focus on uniting against this, because they are fully focused on uniting with the same elements that rioted on January 6th. So I'd argue that we are up against real challenges as organizers, just as Asha pointed out. So we must continue to call out not only the normalization of counterinsurgency, but the inability for our people to recognize it. The misdirection of the issues that are directly facing the majority of Black people today, like housing, education, healthcare, etc., is being led by the Black pundits, the Black misleadership class, like the Congressional Black Caucus, and Black celebrities, all clamoring for their own stitch within the American fabric. So it is more important for them to advocate for and cheer on more seats at the table than acknowledge the ongoing and unaddressed devastation heightened by the pandemic. And this has resulted in uncritical praise of representation without any introspection of what those positions mean. So some have been calling it intersectional imperialism. What are we expressing to the rest of the African diaspora about representation when the US has more than 800 military bases globally, separating the world into military commands, AFRICOM, SOUTHCOM, Indo-Pacific Command? And the Black people in the US will now hold leadership positions within the institutions that back coups, that issue deadly sanctions, that train neo-colonial police forces in colonized nations to be just as deadly as the police here. And this lack of a firm anti-imperialist position is a far cry from the revolutionary internationalist traditions rooted in organizations like SNCC, like RAM, like the Black Panther Party, or with leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, names that are evoked, but their politics are erased and rewritten into American history as signs of progress and never of resistance. They were organizations and people who understood that there could be no freedom for Black people here without the liberation of Black people everywhere. Representation has been weaponized against us by an organized ruling class and elites that knows the benefit of assimilation and symbolism. In his book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, Dr. Jared Ball notes that Black people were used in the background of Black and white movies to project American inclusion and democracy to the world, to project internationally as an image of an expanding and free United States. Despite the systemic oppression, despite Jim Crow. So this push for inclusion and diversity within the settler colonial nation that is the US, that produces the type of people that storm the Capitol, must be understood as propaganda and not progress. Nothing more than reimagining of the historical relationships between Blackness and the US empire in an effort to advance some and not all. So we have to reject the instances of where we see a Black cop being talked about as heroic, right? And we have to we have to reject the embracement of Black faces heading the US empire. And we have to do so making the connections between global and domestic imperialism, because there is no difference between military occupation of colonized nations and police occupation of colonized neighborhoods, our neighborhoods here. So it's my hope that with these conversations and as they continue, as we claim that Assata taught me, that we remember that the FBI under leadership of a Black man during Obama's presidency was the one who put on that terrorist list. So as we claim Assata taught me, we can't forget and we can't continue to neglect our comrades who remain political prisoners after over 40 years. Free Sundiata, free Mutulu Shakur, free Jamil Al-Amin, free Mumia, and free all political prisoners whose contributions to the Black radical movement, to Black liberation of all Africans worldwide was met with repressive state punishment as a warning for us all, especially now as more people embrace a heightened police state. So it is also my hope that we continuously encourage all generations of Africans to join organizations and to advance the struggle. Thank you.
Woo! All right, intersectional imperialism, that's a word. And yes, absolutely, we need to have more of these intergenerational conversations. And what we do not need is we do not need to put a Black face on white supremacy. We need to stop people from seeing within the confines of white supremacy and to be able to recognize that we have to build beyond that which has been given to us instead of just trying to blackface it. You know, they said in these chats, Erica is the GOAT, and that's why, you know, we love to hear from you. And, you know, and you can see how excited people are reading through, you know, looking at these chats. Want to remind you all, please, if you have questions, to drop them in the chat or in the question and answer session so we can ask the panelists your questions if we have enough time. Going to move right on forward to my good brother, Dedan. Let's hear what you got to say. Let's go.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very excited to be here and be on such a great panel. I think this conversation is very important, especially in this period that we live in right now, to really uplift the Black radical tradition. That is the tradition that we have to follow during this time. We have to remember that our history is not a history that is founded on politics that have some type of a message of U.S. tranquility. But our history is a history that's steeped in radical resistance. You see what I'm saying? And that is the tradition that we must keep on moving forward in order to alleviate these issues that we continue to face today. The sentiment of Black resistance over the past 6 years has been shaped by the continuous police killings of Black and brown colonized people in this country. And that is the reality that we continue to face no matter who sits in this seat of imperialism. So I think moving forward, you know, as we develop a new consciousness, as we develop new strategies on moving forward, we have to really understand the strategy of the state and how it is maintained and how it's kept to keep our people in a position of oppression. It was Lenin's description himself that said that the state is an instrument for the exploitation of the oppressed, you know, and it hasn't changed no matter who is in power. You see what I'm saying? Because that one power structure is always the dominant power of white power, white supremacy. And that is the thing that we're up against. You see what I'm saying? So I agree fully with a lot of the sentiment that has been expressed, that we can no longer allow, you know, the liberal class or the Black bourgeoisie to push Black excellence, you know, in our face, when this excellence has a tendency to only expose, you know, the Black elite, the Black wealthy, and it never trickles down to the working class elements, you know, the people in the ghetto, the people in Philadelphia, the people in Baltimore, the people in Greenville, North Carolina, and things like that. So we don't want, you know, we don't want Black excellence. We want Black resistance. We want the power and the ability to determine our own lifestyle, to show what that Black excellence is when the masses have the ability to attain it for ourselves. So, you know, moving forward, you know, that is my line. You know, it is a crucial moment that we stay in. There is no way to confront the situation that we're in, but organizing zones of powers, you know, to create, you know, power to transform, you know, our situation, to control the means of production, to control political power on all spectrums. And that is the job and the duty that we're up against. And I think that is something that we have been pushing here in colonized Greenville, North Carolina, home of the Tuscarora Nation. And what we do with my Penduzzi is to gauge this resistance movement, but to give it some type of objective behind it, to put some kind of politics behind it, with a strategy that makes or creates some kind of opening to really, you know, dismantle this system that we're up against. So, you know, moving forward, you know, that is the challenge. That is what I hope we all dedicated to do and want to see done.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dedan. You know, and, you know, one of the things that was also brought up is that we need to remember that we need to fight for our political prisoners, you know, and our political prisoners, new and old, we cannot forget. And, you know, and part of what they're doing now is trying to establish new political prisoners, taking people who are really powerful in our community, taking them from our community, taking the resources of our work and our organizing, you know, energies, and putting them behind, you know, as is necessary, fighting for the freedom of our comrades, you know, and so, you know, even here on this panel, we have individuals who have to fight for their freedom because they're fighting for our freedom. And, you know, and Brother Dedan is one of them. And, you know, we are always with you and appreciate you and appreciate your insights, Dedan. Again, if you have questions, remember to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. And we're going to move forward now to our next panelist. I'm going to read her bio. Elaine Brown is a former leader of the Black Panther Party. She is the author of A Taste of Power and The Condemnation of Little B. A Taste of Power is slated for film production at the end of 2021. Woo woo! Elaine is executive director of the Michael Lewis Legal Defense Committee, supporting the legal appeal of Lewis Little B, who arrested in 1997 in Atlanta, Georgia at the age of 13 for a murder he did not commit, was convicted and sentenced as an adult to life in prison where he remains. Elaine is CEO of the nonprofit organization Oakland and the World Enterprises Incorporated, dedicated to launching and sustaining businesses for cooperative ownership by formerly incarcerated and other people facing extreme barriers to economic survival, which organization is currently building 79. The organization is currently building 79 affordable housing units in West Oakland, California, where Elaine resides. And so with no further ado, thank you so much. And excited to hear from you, Sister Elaine.
Thank you, everyone from Black Alliance for Peace, especially my comrade, brother Jamu. I want to, before I get started, I'm going to introduce to you, somebody said she can be seen, so I'm hoping so, Sister Wanda Johnson. Wanda Johnson is the mother of Oscar Grant, and we here in Oakland are struggling and winning an effort to reopen the Oscar Grant murder case from 2009 because there was more than one pig who killed Oscar. One of them was prosecuted, only did 11 months, and the other one was not prosecuted, but he was certainly a part of the murder of Oscar, putting his knee on Oscar's neck, a la George Floyd, and holding Oscar down while the other cop shot him in the back. Somebody says that Wanda can be seen. I appreciate you guys putting this information out there. This is what we're doing now. We want you to call this district attorney here in Oakland and tell her that you want to see Police Officer Anthony Peroni. You'll see his name there, charged with the felony murder of Oscar Grant. Right now, we're doing this. We've gotten a lot of play on this, and all the social media activists, as I like to say, are weighing in. And so I don't know if Wanda, is she around just to say hello quickly? I don't know. But if not, Sister Wanda is here. She wanted to tune in to see what you're doing. And I would hope that all of you will take a minute of your day to simply weigh in by calling O'Malley and signing a petition we have circulating. One is through change.org. One is the one that we have, Oscar Grant, justiceforoscargrant.org, and so forth. So please, if you can do something to support this effort, the more people pound on this racist woman, the more we can do it. And the significance we can discuss later with questions and answers. A lot of interesting comments, a lot of analysis I heard. I appreciate the Sister Erica talking about political prisoners, but I would like to say there's a young brother in prison in Georgia among many who is also a political prisoner because it's the politics of this country that put a 13-year-old black boy in a joint since he was 13. He's now 37 years old for a murder he did not commit, because this country is the only one in the world that actually adjudicates children as adults. And so there's a certain elitism. Jamil Al-Amin, we've been fighting for him since he was arrested in 2000. He's been my comrade and friend from back in the day as H. Rap Brown. And there's a brother named Chip Fitzgerald that no one seems to want to remember, who was actually in the Black Panther Party, who was arrested and charged with a murder in 1969. And he is still in prison today in the state of California, here in the state of California. So if we're going to name out these people, I would like to name a comrade of mine who was actually a member of the Black Panther Party, Chip Fitzgerald. And we have to do another analysis on what is a political prisoner, I think, because so many of our young brothers and sisters and people who are in prison, it is the political agenda that has put them in prison. And a lot of the people who are in prison were not politically conscious when they went to prison. So we probably need to discuss it. But in any case, I want to use this time very quick, try to speak quickly and not waste too much of your time on rhetoric. The Black Panther Party, as many of you know, deemed ourselves a revolutionary vanguard organization. This was a Leninist theory that we were developing an organizing arm to ready the people for revolution. So we were not the makers of the revolution, though we somewhat arrogantly used to say that. What did we mean by revolution? We had no blueprint for what would happen in the United States empire. There's nobody been able to overthrow, undermine, or change what's going on here. So we had to figure out how to talk about our own freedom. Our goal, of course, was freedom. But our goal was to dismantle the existing capitalist and racist socioeconomic structure of the U.S. so we could create an egalitarian society. But our primary goal was the freedom and liberation of Black people. But we recognized that in order for us to be free, we could not be a part of the scheme that oppressed us. And so our analysis ultimately became a Marxist-Leninist analysis. We were not a nationalist or anything else. A lot of people don't know that about the Black Panther Party, or they like to think we were the opposite number. of the Ku Klux Klan or whatever it is that people think. We were also dialectical materialists. So our analysis was based on objective facts. In other words, materialism. We did not accept spiritual notions about what do I think, but what can we objectively say is correct, independent of our own thought about it. And we recognized that change was in the nature of things, so we had to put that into our analysis. So the question is, what is the, using that analysis, let's look at where we are today. Now, people have talked about, a lot of police questions and so forth and so on. But in essence, as my comrade Jamu said, we really remain an oppressed minority in the United States of America. And there's been no significant change in our status probably since 1865, and really not much from that, except for variations on the theme and Negroes in office and all the stuff that you guys have talked about. And I noticed that I'm the old person here, so I guess this is the intergenerational part of this conversation, because I'm the old one here. I'm 77 now. The question is, where are we? We have the highest poverty rates. I mean, we need to remember this stuff because we get caught up in a lot of other stuff. Highest poverty, highest homelessness, worst health states with highest cancer death rates, as Jamu pointed out, which many people don't acknowledge, highest infant mortality and maternal mortality death rates. We're the lowest education levels. We have 1% of all business revenues, and that's only important when you look at the context of things. And of course, the highest incarceration rate. So the question is, if we're going to address any of these problems, we have to have a correct analysis of how we got here. So, people can say, well, how did we get a high cancer death rate? And some people today believe there's some kind of genetic problem going on with Black people. Why do we have coronavirus death rates higher than white people or whatever? Our high poverty rate is due in many cases in the neoliberal assessment, which includes many, many, many Black people as well as Negroes, the lack of any kind of work ethic. We don't want to work. And the other thing is that the reason we don't have a high education levels is because we have some sort of brain deficiency. And I'm sure some of you remember there have been a myriad conversations about this and all kinds of pseudo-scientific statements about it. But these problems, of course, are simply manifestations of our oppression and have to be seen like that. So we have to recognize who are our enemies and our friends. We quoting Mao, which the Black Panther Party always embraced a sort of Maoist theory, just like we did Che Guevara. And I want to quote Che Guevara here because I always like to, that, words are beautiful, but actions are supreme. So using the Oscar Grant case, when he was murdered by the police here in Oakland, the transit police, what's called BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, in 2009, when the one cop was charged with murder, but only was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, so forth. But the family went to the highest authority in the nation, which was the Justice Department, the Attorney General, a Negro named Eric Holder. And of course, you all know what happened. Eric Holder said, this had nothing to do with me. He did what he was supposed to do as Attorney General of the United States. So what this demonstrates and what we have to show our people in the hood, and that's what I loved about this brother. You say Dedan, I knew a brother named Dedan, that's how he said it. But if you say Dedan, I'll go along with that. I'll say your name the way you want to say it. But in any case, we're not talking to the people who get arrested a lot. A lot of us are having conversations that are way outside of the day-to-day brother from the hood and doesn't look like you are, Brother Dedan. So I just wanted to make note of that. The bottom line is that what we have to recognize is these police killings are not police killings. They are the entire United States government endorsing the murder of our people. Now, since nobody's trying to off the pig these days, I'm gonna let that rest for a minute. Since ain't nobody trying to off the pig, don't even want to talk like that. We want to talk about police state, anti-terror, police violence, off the pig. That was a good statement that we made. Since ain't nobody offing no pigs these days, we are stuck with dealing with the existing scheme. So all the conversation about not dealing with the scheme is meaningless because we're not taking matters into our own hands. We're not delivering any consequences for any of this police violence. Here's this little girl, Breonna Taylor, in her bed, in her house. They walk in and kill her black while sleeping while black. And we're worried about this Negro Daniel, whatever his name is. I don't try to remember names of pigs, they're interchangeable. Here we are talking about, let's replace him. Well, what did we do in Ferguson? After Michael Brown was killed, the cracker, and I like to say these words, who was a pig, a former cop, a Republican, remained the mayor and was reelected in a city that has 67% Black in it. Now, we're not organizing if that's what's going on. So let's get it straight. All these people that made their bones on Ferguson ended up with a white boy who had been the mayor before, denounced the movement, got re-elected with 67% Black in a city that only had 21,000 people in it. So we're talking about charging a road cop as if one cop is different. What Black cops have been jumping up and down, talking about, hey, this white boy can't kill our people. They've been standing behind the blue line. So where is our delivery of a consequence? Where is our action other than waiting 2 years of marching in Ferguson to sit there and tell ourselves that we did a good job? And now you have some negress, just like the woman that's the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, and she's all into gender identity and sexual identity, and she done called the National Guard. Somebody said, can I get an amen on that right now? Can I get a witness that the broad called the National, it's a Black woman lesbian who calls the National Guard on the people for protesting in Chicago over George Floyd. Now, we have to go back to slavery in order for us to make the links. This ain't no link from Ferguson. This is not a link from the Black Panther Party. This is not, took our place in line. This is not a link from Harriet Tubman. I thought that film was terrible, but this is not a link. This is a long chain of struggle. From day one, our people have resisted. And otherwise, we wouldn't even be here. I don't even know how we came through all those things. What was the purpose of slavery? All of you are smart. You know what's going on. To develop an economic base for the English, all the other European, thugs and so forth, raping the world, so forth and so on. After they killed all the native people and cleared Virginia, they had to have people to grow that tobacco. They didn't know how to do anything. Plus, they were eating each other during several of those years because they didn't know how to grow food. I find that interesting because so many people have told me I have an urban farm. It was all formerly incarcerated on there. And people are like, we need to learn how to eat. What do you mean Black people need how to eat and grow things? Who's been growing everything for America for 250 years? Please sit down. So all these other employers. So by the time you get to 1776, 150 years into our enslavement, and then there's this politically correct term about we weren't slaves, we were enslaved people, as if that's going to change the history. This is the kind of stuff we get hung up on. The Georgia cotton growers and the South Carolina rice growers were among the richest men in the world. And what did the slavery do to us? We already know, the horrors, and we can't talk about it because it would be too much for us. It would take like generations to talk about just the details of horror. But one thing it did do, it divided us. We're no we. We were not a people with land, with common social, political, and financial institutions. We were prohibited from speaking our own language, practicing our own religion, knowing our own history, singing our own song, knowing our own names, having control over our own bodies, creating our own families and family life, reduced to chattel, no recognition of our humanity, all this, and then deemed inherently inferior to whites. And we became a slave class. Something that Karl Marx never seemed to really recognize because he thought once the emancipation or once freedom came, as he called it, that we would suddenly blend into the society, but he forgot about the slave class only had one group of people, and that was African people in it. As I like to tell all of my comrades and sisters and brothers in the various other groups of color, whatever they are and other groupings, well, no ling ting tong in that cotton field. Let's get it straight. We were the slaves in America now. So the Black codes come right after 1865, the so-called 13th Amendment, freeing us, and we then became free labor by being criminalized. We were a criminal class. So being Black, it wasn't looking at a white woman who was not having a job from the Black codes. Now you're gonna go build up railroad tracks, all that stuff that did the push west that Lincoln was trying to do, and noting duly that Marx did say that without cotton, there wouldn't have been any industrialization. Without slaves, there wouldn't have been any cotton. So we spent the next decades or so becoming criminals and working on the chain gang. Denied every single thing we needed to survive. No 40 acres. No. People talk about the mule it's really amazing how ridiculous we have become. No food, no housing, no medical care, so forth and so on. And working on the chain gang or otherwise sharecroppers or else in service to white people as cooks, housekeepers, field hands, so forth. Eventually, some of our people who were able to get educated, so forth and so on, started resisting and, more importantly, started building stuff for us, you know, as in the Booker T. Washington model that morphed into Marcus Garvey, which morphed into the Nation of Islam, and so forth. And we struggled for 100 years so we could then get the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Now, what did that do for us? What did it do for us? I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure that we ain't free. So we have to look at where we came to be when the Black Panther Party entered. And I'm not here to talk about per se the Black Panther Party. We have to think about where did we come from? We stepped into the scene in 1966. 1 year after the Voting Rights Act was passed. Why was the Voting Rights Act passed? People fought like dogs, bled like dogs. Why was the Civil Rights Act passed? People fought like dogs. But then we started to realize that Dr. King did, where do we go from here? And that we really hadn't achieved very much. And he starts to form the Poor People's Campaign and talks about capitalism and communism and so forth. So, what is our agenda today in this ongoing struggle for what I'm calling freedom, power to determine our destinies? Is it to fix some little piece of this powerful empire? So when we say defund the police, do we really think that defunding the police, whatever that might mean, and we're not sure, is going to, what will it accomplish? What will defunding the police accomplish? Is it necessary? Do you think that Black people are going to be supporting defund the police? I assure you that if you hit the Black community, people want somebody to keep people out of the way. There's all kinds of confusion within the Black community because we ain't been organizing them in the way that we need to. So Black people are looking for the police to come and separate gang activity. They got all kinds of issues that our people are not prepared to say defund the police. And so you don't want to get so far ahead of the people that they can't see you, as we tried to tell Eldridge Cleaver back in the day. And he wasn't that far ahead anyway, because he ended up being a Republican. But anyway, is there a revolutionary goal in distinguishing ourselves along sexual lines and sexual identities and feminism and so forth? Is there a revolutionary organization around that? What is our goal in that? Because what is happening is we're starting to separate ourselves and divide ourselves in these little categories and mostly identify with, quote, other people of color and whatever else there is. Do we think that just replacing Daniel Cameron as the Attorney General of Kentucky is going to be even begin to deal with the question of justice for Breonna Taylor, even though we're not sure what justice for Breonna Taylor means? Because as I mentioned, we did all of that in Ferguson and ended up with this racist James Knowles. And then there's Lori Lightfoot, the Black woman, and so forth. So I want to finish up by saying this, that Huey Newton said that the gun is not necessarily revolutionary because the reactionaries have guns. It is the ideology behind the gun that defines it. And that applies to everything that we're doing. What is our ideology? Now, clearly the panelists here are anti-capitalist, I guess you could say, in some generic way. The question is, what is our action? What is going to drive us? We have to be undergirded by this ideology, and we have to know where we're going. But we are stuck with stuff. Of course, we're stuck with all this neoliberal rhetoric. But Obama, my attitude is, you killed Gaddafi. So what else is there for us to talk about right now? So the discussions that we have right now around peaceful protest versus violent protest, and we actually get involved in stuff like that. We have identity issues that divide us. I went to this Afro-punk thing, and everybody was walking around with a little sticker as to what their pronoun was. And if you didn't have a pronoun sticker, it was like you were left out. So I decided my pronoun was going to be comrade. And so people were actually walking around looking at people's pronouns and were almost isolated if you didn't say the right thing. This is among us. And then it turns out that Afro-punk was just a festival anyway. And I hope somebody's on here that can want to say something different to me, because that's what it was. So the question is, we've been dividing ourselves. We still talking about the hood versus educated Negroes, college students versus street thugs. I can remember when my daughter was at Spelman. That was the time of Entezaki Shange and Toni K. Bambara and Barbara Williams and Kitchen Table Press and all the super feminist Black women writers, and everything was wonderful. They were the sisters. The Spelman sisters were the sisters. But Shaniqua across the street in University Home wasn't our sister. That wasn't our sister. We didn't like her because she had a wig or weave. She had 2 or 3 babies out of wedlock. She was smoking weed around. We didn't even like her. And yet we pretended that we were serving her interests, that we loved her. We have those kind of divisions still going on as if we have a class distinction among Black. We still talking about a sister wearing weave versus a natural hair. We're still on color question, but now we've gone off into a question of colorism. We know we're still on color questions, but we're not focused on liberation. That's why. And finally, we're dealing with police brutality, saying that's more important than the housing problems, or housing is more important than health. Health is more important than voting for the right people, as if even whoever the president was, it's the presidency. It is part of the imperial structure. Doesn't matter who the president is. Or even supporting Black people for office who are Black and who are absolutely doing nothing. Here in Oakland, we got a whole bunch of examples like that. I think the Black Panther Party established some sort of a pattern that we could look at, from self-defense to our survival programs, where we actually did feed people regularly in an effort to organize them around their right to eat. We formed coalitions with everything from Native Americans, which we helped to form the AIM organization, certainly the Brown Berets, Young Lords, even the Young Patriots was a bunch of poor whites out of Chicago. International coalition with Frelimo and ZANU and so forth, engaged in electoral politics and any other thing that we thought was necessary that would drive and organize our people to become ready for revolution. So that is what I think that my message is, that maybe there's some stuff we did back then and this intergenerational conversation that can be useful and adapted to today's conditions. Thank you very much, and power to the people.
All power to the people. Thank you so much, Elaine, for that, that long look over the course of these situations, and looking at what it is that, that we can learn from our long history that we are building on as we're building the history of our future generations and being the history of our future generations. You know, so there were a lot of things that were discussed in this space. We've got just a little time before to be able to get to some questions. One question actually, you know, as it relates to
before we jump into that.
Before I jump into questions, I did want to introduce the Sister Wanda and let the Sister Wanda speak really quickly that Elaine mentioned earlier regarding Oscar Grant. So Wanda, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Please greet the community.
Hello, everyone. And I just want to say that I have enjoyed the program thus far. It is truly an honor just to sit and listen and to glean so much of our history and so many of the great things that we as a people need to learn. And I just, you know, I listened to Elaine, who's such a great woman, a fighter for sure. And so I'm just happy to be on the line listening and receiving some nuggets. And I just encourage unity, as has been spoken about. When we as a people can come together as one and fight our causes together, that's when we will see change in our communities. Until we do that, we will not see the change. But when we do that, we will begin to see the change in our communities, because not only have we band together as one, but we've come in a united front, teaching each other what we need to learn so that we can, as a people, could move forward. And those who have not moved forward, we can carry them along the way to victory. So I'm just grateful to be on the session today. I'm taking notes and learning. Again, thank you for this opportunity just to share. And just please flood District Attorney Nancy O'Malley's phone with calls seeking justice for my son, Oscar, who was killed January 1st, 2009 at the Fruitvale BART station in Oakland, California. laying on the platform, officer getting up, shooting him and killing him, but we're trying to get the officer who instigated the whole situation charged with felony murder. And only as banding together can we make this happen. So we need your support to flood the phone lines, to sign the petitions, and to walk with us as we walk through this journey 12 years later seeking justice. So thank you again for this opportunity to listen in and to hear the great nuggets that have went on thus far.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to make the call. I'm happy to hear your voice. And we did put in the chat both the link to go to the petition and information for calling DA Nancy O'Malley regarding reopening the case against those officers who murdered our brother, Oscar Grant. Now, want to get to questions in order, we have a little bit of time. One of the things that came up, actually, two panelists brought up in two different ways. Asha and Elaine brought up the concerns around the way that the movement exists and the ways that we've organized. And, Asha mentioned things like the concerns around like patriarchy that we find within our movement and some of the things about how we deal with each other. As Elaine also brought up some of the things about how we deal with each other. The issue around the pronouns that Elaine brought up is very significant as it relates to us making sure that we are actually inclusive of our whole community and we make sure everybody in our community knows that they're included. But then, Elaine mentioned feeling that same thing, that same effort around inclusion for other people feeling like it may, not maybe relating to that, it feeling like an issue of exclusion. But the question that I want to ask is within these contexts of like looking at our histories of organizing and some of the ways that it has been maybe considered hierarchical or has been hierarchical, has been patriarchal, some of the things from the past, how is that organizing? We know that for a lot of young people today, a lot of these things aren't working for us anymore, or a lot of people say that these things aren't working. What is it that we think is working? Is this history, is this old way of organizing? Are there aspects of this way that's organizing that does work? Do you feel like some of these older ways of organizing do not work? And if either way, what is it that does work today, particularly as we are still seeking to actually face our challenges of building this Black radical movement today? That's my question to the panelists. Any of you could jump in and hopefully my question is clear. What do we need? What do we need as we're building our organizations in order to be able to advance our movement today?
Okay, well, if nobody's going to say anything right now, I'm going to jump in. There is no one answer of what we need, because if we knew that, we'd be free by now. So, but the bottom line is that you made several comments and said, there's something about our pronouns and inclusivity. These are words that have nothing to do with the Black story. And then back, I just remind people that if we had been in the fourth quarter of the Georgia cotton farm, I doubt that we would have worried about what pronoun we had. I doubt that we would have worried about what our gender identity was at that time, because we recognized that we had a common problem of slavery. Now we didn't, so what I'm trying to say is this: I'm not dismissing anybody's identity issues or inclusivity. I'm not even dealing with that. The question is, are we going to find our way to being a people again and having a common goal of freedom and liberation? And secondly, are we going to embrace not these, rather arcane, quite frankly, identities, and recognize that Shaniqua and Dante and them are out of this conversation? They're not in this conversation. And if we're not going to deal with them, who are we talking to? That was my point. So there is no one thing. I'm building housing. I'm feeding people. I'm working with Oscar Grant. I've got my brother in the prison. There's a million things that we can be doing. If anybody here has the answer, it's on and popping. Let's go.
I want to give space for other panelists. If there's another panelist who would like to add on to this question.
You just really, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Comrade.
Yulian?
I was just gonna say, like, maybe like quickly, and I think I'm not, I hope I don't like mispronounce like their name, but I think Nana put it pretty well in like the chat. I think that there's definitely like space to be held, and there should be, right, within our community that is, and I guess I'll refrain from inclusive, because I think there's this idea that like if we're talking about being inclusive, then that means that they were like exclusive at some point. But I think that like the Black queer struggle is something that is like innate within the struggle as a whole. And I think that the obvious goal of liberation is tantamount, but there are so many ways in which we can get there that include our people that we call like our siblings and our family that are queer and do relate to those and do hold those identities. So I think it's like equal, like we can hold space and have and recognize the importance in that. And I think that I think is extremely important, which I think is interesting in this way, because we also, when we're talking about like struggle and wanting to like look towards liberation, a lot of these problems that we see in relation to identity and the issues that pop up are a result of colonial like systems and the input, like people imposing those like colonial thoughts onto us in terms of being homophobic, transphobic, and things like that. And I think that is integral in looking at what liberation looks like for all people, right? So that's just all I wanted to bring up.
Thank you. So I know Erica has something to say, Dedan has something to say, and it looks like Asha. So let's go. Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what was just said, just about the way that we're viewing inclusivity, right? Especially coming off of the conversations, the centering conversations that we had about the way the representation is being used as a neocolonial tool, that these are things that we have to be mindful of, right? Because they all get weaponized against us as it is, right? I think the whole purpose of pointing out Lori Lightfoot is to say that even you can exist in this body as this gender, this sexuality, and still be in opposition to radicalization and revolution. You could still be in opposition to that. But with that said, I think that the focus on words like inclusivity, when we're talking about building Black community, we cannot build Black community and then sort of talk around these conversations about gender identity and not want to understand that, because within that includes violence. And just like Asha talked about, a lot of the issues that we're having with organizing our communities is the violence. A lot of the issues that we're having about even suggesting defunding the police to communities is because of the violence that exists. So I think that we can't sort of, I didn't personally take the what was said as being as something exclusionary, but I do understand where it can be thought of that way, or where people could take offense to that. And I just think that we do need to be mindful of the ways that a lot of these terms are weaponized, but we do need to also be mindful of the fact that these are material realities and violence exists, and there's a way that we have to bring these things up and have to have these honest conversations. But I do also think that this struggle is good. This is a good struggle to have, right? Because we can't really sit silently with what opinions and just assume the thoughts that people are having. We absolutely need to have these struggles intercommunally if we want to build community, if we want to look beyond our identities.
Thank you, Erica. And just to be clear, like at least for myself, when I said that I was not suggesting that Sister Elaine was saying was being exclusionary in that, but that what I heard was her experiencing in our effort to be inclusive, there was still an experience that she had of not feeling, of also feeling somewhat excluded. And how do we build the bridges around that and help bring everyone and do the work to bring everyone in our community at the table? Dedan? You're muted, Dedan.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to touch on the point. I think the question about the youth participation and older comrades participation, and does it align and things like that. I think it's important to have the youth involved as well. During the summer around the George Floyd killing, Mapinduzi and myself was involved in numerous actions all across Eastern North Carolina, Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, and Durham. And then we seen a lot of the action, a lot of the youth was very involved in the movements that was happening in the street, but at the same time, it still had a level of spontaneity. And so I think, moving forward, with building this new Black radical movement, it should involve developing a cadre around the struggle of Black working class issues, and cadres won't develop off theory alone. So it's like we have to struggle around the ideas that must be affirmed by practice, that also builds this consciousness that engage, all of our people, whether they're in college, whether they're in the hood, wherever they are, of the importance of why it is that we must engage in this struggle. And that was just my little spin on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dedan. Asha, did you still want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just be brief since a lot of folks have commented on this point. But, the way I see it, when we zoom out and we're talking about dismantling and tearing down white supremacy and capitalism, I think patriarchy is another macro level structure that works in tandem with those structures to oppress us, right? The project of building the US empire was a white supremacist, a patriarchal, and a capitalist project. And so I think on a structural level, we have to understand, that as a part of what we're trying to undo as well. I think, when I mentioned gender and sexual violence in our movement and in our communities, that is something that, was used as a tool of colonization on this land, and used as a tool that is a part of the story of the enslavement of Black people on this land and around the world. And so, yeah, I see it as not just about kind of that individual level relationships or individual people's preferences, but a part of the big picture structures that we want to be. And affirming other people's identities within our movements is I don't know, I think just a part of how we can build a culture of respecting how we want to be in a decolonized or anti-capitalist or whatever the liberatory future that we're trying to build. So that's how I see it.
Thank you. Brother Ajamu, did you want to make any comments in response to these?
Just very briefly, that basically when we talk about building a revolutionary process and talking about the liberation of people and building new societies, I think it's quite clear that what we're talking about is a ending of oppression for all people. We're talking about transforming ourselves and transforming societies. And one of the positive contributions that me as an old head have understood these last couple of decades is a greater and broader appreciation of the internal contradictions within our own movement and what we needed to do, what kind of struggles we had to engage in to make sure that all of us were included in this process. But I think what people are also saying too, that with the understanding of the absolute necessity for respecting everyone's identity, it is absolutely required also, though, that is grounded in a political perspective, a revolutionary perspective. It's not enough to embrace a certain kind of social identity, as we have said with people like Lori Lightfoot and others, and you're still reactionary. Eric Holder is a brother. He's a pig. Same thing with Barack Obama. Okay, so when we talk about building a revolutionary process, it is a process that's inclusive, if you will, of all of this, but grounded in an understanding, a revolutionary commitment, and a revolutionary understanding of what we have to build, the kind of societies we have to build, and that assistance in understanding those elements is one of the things that we have learned from struggles of young folks who have helped us to understand, the complexities of our situation and some of the internal issues we had to deal with.
Thank you. So it is 8:35. Do we think we have time to pull a question from the audience? And we were supposed to be finishing at this point. We want to be respectful of people's times, but we had so many questions. Should we take a question?
Can we take two?
All right, okay. So, one question, you're just talking about this current administration and these people who are, these black-bodied white supremacists. So one question that comes up is, regarding the current administration now that's in office, the Biden administration in office, the Obama Jr. administration back in office. What is it how does this impact our agenda? What is like within the context of how this impacts our community? We talked about how the Obama administration impacted the ideologies in our community and how we relate to the state. So now that we have this kind of new pearls and chucks, Biden, in office, administration in office, how do we fight against deepening that impact? What do we do moving forward? I see a couple of the panelists are not muted. Is there someone who has a response to this question?
Yeah, I can go ahead. One of my frequent criticisms is like the way that people discuss identity politics, right? And I always push back, like, no, that's not identity politics. It's identity reductionism. Like the way identities are just reduced to race or gender without any introspection of politics. Yeah, so I think that for the large part, what we're hold on, Yane, some of the question again, because I think I got lost reading the chat.
We're just looking at like the current administration, how that impacts our community, and what do we do next? What is the agenda moving forward? Yeah,
and I think I talked about it earlier. We need to continue to have these like conversations and raise this and advance the struggle, right? I think also, to quote Kwame Ture again, like we really have to have a ruthless class struggle, because I think what the main issue is the inability for our communities to understand themselves as working class people, what that means to be a working class people, and then the rejection of what that sounds like in the concept of American dream, right? Like, do you want to be working class, or do you want to have the glitz and the glam when we look at the social media activity around that? So I think that moving forward, we need to really like commit to political education, like this mass sort of political education, and then get more people to join organizations and organize, because I think isolated, it's a lot easier for people to be susceptible to the messaging, but when in an organized group that's with a focus of political education, it's a lot tougher to penetrate.
Thank you. I do have another question. Is there somebody else who wants to tackle this one? One other panelist maybe who wants to tackle this, or, still going into like this illusion of equality that comes with our, with that Kapamala. No one else? Okay, so then I'm going to move to another question that's actually similar, that is related to your answer around joining an organization. This person asks, when it comes to expanding the internationalist and anti-imperialist lens that the young Black diaspora really needs, beyond joining an organization, which we know is essential, what are effective points of entry that any of you have found to be successful with in organizing youth, and particularly in diverting them from the neoliberal and Black bourgeoisie lens that people are currently really falling prey to?
I can go, I guess. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, a lot of the things that we do in Mapinduzi that brings a lot of youth in, I guess, and connects on the international question, is this question of militarism, excuse me. We've seen it in Ferguson, we've seen it in Baltimore, we've seen it in Charlotte, we've seen a little bit of that in Greenville, North Carolina this year. So, we just make a connect to say the same way that our people are domestically colonized here in this country, Black, brown, and other people that look exactly like us are in fact colonized by this same country indeed, and use the same tactics to commit violence on our communities and on our people. In Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina, there was 2 or 3 years ago, Raleigh Police Department collaborated with the Deadly Exchange Program, where they sent troops to Israel to learn these tactics to create all type of violence and brutality on Black and brown people and come back to the States and use these same tactics. So these are some things that we use to connect the dots to show, how, this country is the greatest threat to world peace wherever it is. When we talk about AFRICOM and how it sets up base all over the world, and then now AFRICOM trying to come back to, to the States in South Carolina, I believe, so it's always these things that we try to use to just try to show that the same repressive nature that is happening in this country happens all over the world due to this country. When we look at the South and this reverse migration almost, where Black and brown people are steadily coming back down to the South because of the labor laws are so lax. The right to work state, minimum wage is only $7.25, so the workers really have no rights in the.
Your sound just dropped out.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. What's the last thing y'all heard?
Just
Workers ain't got no rights.
No rights in them.
So with that, military bases are all over the South. The oppression is deep in the South when it comes to police and the good old boy network. So we just try our best to align these things with a deeper issue.
Thank you. Actually, that reminds me, and one of the things that I feel that Sister Elaine was alluding to was how a lot of times the organizing community can be somewhat elitist, right? It can be a pretty elitist space, and that can sometimes create those separations. But to the point that you're making, Dedan, you remind me of when we were protesting the night that they killed Walter Wallace Jr. in Philadelphia, and we were in the hood and we were with the hood and we were standing around a police car that somehow happened to be on fire, and there was a sister there from the hood who was there saying, like, the same thing is happening right now in Nigeria. The same thing is happening right now in SARS, and was bringing that up, which was a beautiful thing to see. So there is, those connections they need to be deepened, but those connections are being made. So I think, is this the end? I think we can't do any more questions. There were so many questions that were asked. This was such a great panel. Really, really do appreciate just hearing your words, and also just being able to engage in some struggle and some real conversation. That's really important. Again, this is the Black Alliance for Peace, and our website is blackallianceforpeace.com. Want to invite people who are not members to check out the website, consider joining, becoming a member or supporter. When you are a member, you also become part of a listserv that provides great information and continue opportunities to engage in discussions and conversations like these, to be exposed to really important materials and information. I want to thank each of the panelists. Ajamu, I want to thank for opening the panel, and also for, launching the concept of the Black Alliance for Peace and helping us to build this organization and guiding that. Thank you, Asha, for your great commentary, insights. Yolian as well, thank you very much. Thank you, Ricky and Dedan, and thank you so much, Elaine, for your comments, and for everyone for your work and your continued commitment to this struggle for liberation. We struggle to win, and we struggle until we do. Please again visit blackallianceforpeace.com. And that was a beautiful sound. Love that sound of the babies. That is what we do this for. So that is a welcome sound. Thank you for that. And if there is nothing more, this has been recorded. It was live on Facebook. It is able to be shared. And please look up all of the panelists so that you can support their work and stay in touch. And please, again, stay closer to the Black Alliance for Peace. Have a wonderful day, and keep your eye out for continued webinars as part of our Black Power series. I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to say some final words, and then we will close. Do you want to start, Dedan, since you were towards the end in the initial statements?
Yeah, I can say a couple of things. First of all, I just want to say again, I'm very appreciative to be on this call. I think it was a great one to be on a panelist with so many, brilliant thinkers. And my thoughts is just, as we move in 2021, it's still no compromise, no retreat. This is not a time to feel lax and think that, you know, just because of administration change makes it easier for the struggle. You know, we know that because of the 1033 program, because of relentless pursuit, because of the constant surveillance that we get due to Black identity extremists, that, you know, our calls for you know, peace and justice and, you know, the ability to self-govern to this country is irreconcilable. They don't want to give it to us. So the only way we can get it is, you know, we continue to fight.
Thank you, Dedan. And so can we hear some words from Yolian?
Yeah, sure. So I thank you so much for like creating a space like this. I will say that I think the space is proof of like the need for constant like intergenerational discussion. Because I think what does happen is not only like, are we able to learn from folks who have like been in the trenches and doing the work as if, you know, but also recognizing like, what are some ways that we can manifest like creating a loving community for us all in the name of like liberation. So I think this was really incredible, and I'm really, really excited to be able to continue doing the work with you all.
Thank you, Yolian. Can I invite some closing words from our sister Elaine?
Sure. There's a big sign in front of me. Well, I said what I had to say, and the bottom line is actions are supreme. And when I said off the pig, the one thing I noticed is that no one addressed that almost everyone jumped on the question of identity and inclusion, but nobody said anything about the question of off the pig. I think that there are some things that we might want to consider. I don't deal with intergenerational conversations because if we were free, then we'd have some kind of different kinds of things to say. So I think that there are some things to learn. I have some things to learn, but in the end of the day, practice is as important as theory, and theory is important, but practice must be driven by theory, but theory theory alone is not sufficient. And rallying and protesting is not sufficient. So I'm going to say that even though I felt that a lot of people didn't care for what I was saying, the bottom line is I believe actions are supreme. And when we begin to get results step by step, bit by bit, and those things don't mean necessarily getting into the street. It may just mean that hardcore day-to-day work of organizing people around the issues that are of interest to them, which may or may not be the things that are of interest to the people who are the organizers. So I think we have to listen to the people, the masses of people, as much as we listen to ourselves. And thank you very much for having me on this panel.
Thank you also, Elaine. And I do want you to know that within the comments, there was a lot of consensus and love with Off the Pigs. I think maybe that didn't come up because everybody just aligned right there and just felt that energy with you. So I'm not sure if you were reading the comments, but that was something.
I was listening to the other panelists, and I'm still going to say the same thing. We haven't done anything to deliver consequences to these pigs. So all this conversation has amounted to not very much to me. Until we decide we're going to deliver consequences and stop bullshitting. So you can be mad about the inclusivity, and you can be mad and saying that I'm not understanding love. I operate on love for 50 some years. So I want to say that because I don't care about comments to me, because I've already lived a lot of my life, but I'm still in the hood. That's the point. I'm still working every day at 77. I'm not having a conversation. I can carry a picket sign any day, but I'm doing a lot of other stuff. And I think actions are supreme, and Off the Pig is something we need to resurrect.
All right. And now I would like to invite Asha to say some comments.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm deeply thankful for this conversation and opportunity for us to struggle together. If we're not, struggling, I think we're, not able to advance the work. So I think it's great that we're digging in and struggling with one another, and really just grateful for the opportunity to do that with you all. Really deep respect for Elaine and all the other panelists and the organizing and work that is just represented in the space. I know even, folks in the chat, the work that you all are doing. I'm a part of an organization called Dissenters. We are Dissenters. That's our website and our social media. feel free to get involved. We're a movement of young people resisting militarism as it manifests itself here in the US and around the world. So yeah, check us out if you're a young person looking for a crew of folks to organize with. And yeah, grateful to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asha. And you know, I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and getting to know you more, and all of us organizing further together. Want to invite Ricky, my darling Ricky, to say some closing words and offer some closing comments. You're muted. Okay.
Yeah, I muted myself. I was like, what is this? Yeah, no, I want to once again thank everyone for joining us, and I want to thank Ajamu and for inviting me to this conversation. Much respect to the panelists. I was deeply enthralled by the conversations from Asha and Yerlin. Just to hear that perspective from younger voices. And I'm hoping my nieces that I invited who are 19, 20, I'm hoping that they were on here just to get, you know, a taste of what you guys have to say, and then even maybe join up with your organizations and expand the work. And I'm deeply honored to have been on this panel with Elaine Brown, who I have much respect and admiration for. And yeah, I'm all for struggle. I'm all for advancing the struggle. I'm all for pushing buttons and and yeah, so I feel that, you know, my mouth isn't the best either, but but I think that struggle is good, and I welcome it, and I think that it's important that we continue to have these conversations, whether or not they're tough or you know, easy, because the longer that we run for them or avoid them or fixate in our positions, you know, the harder it is going to be for us to come to some consensus about what community control looks like, and you know, the what Black liberation looks like. So yeah, thank you all again, and forward ever.
Thank you. And you know, I want to invite each of the panelists to leave your handles and websites in the chat so that people can grab them before we go. And so if you could do that now while we hear some final comments from the national organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace, Brother Ajamu Baraka.
Thank you, Yaneng, and I just want to thank everybody for being a part of this evening, in particular, all of the panelists. You inspire me, because I know that we have some up and coming warriors who are going to be able to continue the struggle until we win. It's also a pleasure always to be in the company of a living legend, our dear sister Elaine Brown. You know, it's interesting, people talk about Assata taught me, and we raise up Assata, and we should, but I think people forget who taught Assata. So I'm glad to be here. I really appreciate you, Sister Elaine, for sharing your time with us. And if we could be at 77, still in the hood, still in the middle of the struggle, then we'll be living up to your example. I hope I'm doing it. I know I'm going out, you know, fighting. So, you know, you are my inspiration, and you know, we're going to try to live up to your model. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you all panelists. Thank everybody. Let's keep on organizing. Let's keep on trying to get ourselves better, and let's win.
Thank you all. Thank you everyone so much. And, you know, thank you for staying with us. We still have so many people on this that are participating. So we're going to close now. This was the point, you know, to be able to bring these perspectives from, you know, a range of experiences, to bring them together so that we can all learn, grow, and be refined as we move forward to do the work of struggling until we win. Now we are going to close. BlackAllianceForPeace.com, Black Alliance for Peace. Check out all of our social media. Off the pigs, and let's go. Liberation. Peace.